When I was probably about 12, I think I was about 12. I was home from school, summer vacation, and one night, Dad came home from work and he said, "Hey, Willis Beitzel," that's Jeremy's uncle, "is going to measure up a job on the roof of Southern High School, and he needs somebody to hold the dumb end of the tape measure. Will you go with him and, hold the dumb end of the tape measure? And you can make a couple bucks, whatever." Okay. So he took me to work at 6, and then Willis picked me up and took me to Southern High, and we put the longest extension ladder that I'd ever seen up on the side of the building, and Willis went up behind me. I wasn't scared of heights, but I wasn't loving that ladder shaking as we were climbing up the 2 stories that Southern is, or whatever it is, and got on top. We got up on that roof, and I helped Willis, and we were doing our measuring and all that kind of stuff, and it started to get pretty hot pretty quick. And it wasn't long, and Willis started to look bad. He was looking rough. And he, at one point, sat down, and I was over, 50 feet away or whatever, and he said, "Adam, come here. And I walked over, and he said, "Did you bring a lunch?" And I said, "Yeah. My mom had packed 2 sandwiches and 2 cupcakes in the yellow igloo cooler, and I had my thermos full of ice water." He said, I need you to go get it." And so I crawled down the ladder, and I went over to the truck, and I grabbed my lunch, and I came back up the ladder, and I handed it to Willis. And by the time I got there, he's panicking. He's a little shaky. And he cracked open that igloo and straight inhaled my entire lunch. And whole sandwiches in one bite, 1 cupcake, just gulp. It was like a snake eating eggs. I mean, you could just see the cupcakes going down his throat. He got all that done, and he was, "Okay, I'm feeling a little better." He told me after that he got the Yehinga, which is Pennsylvania Dutch for, I think, hypoglycemia. I'm not sure why they have a word for that, but they do. And he felt like he was going to pass out. He said, "I don't think I could have made it back down the ladder." And so it was good I had a lunch. So as my last cupcake was going down his throat, I wasn't feeling too good about this because now I don't have a lunch. But then he took me to Arby's, and I had never been to an Arby's before. And that beef and cheddar and curly fries, that is living. And at the end of the day, I was really glad that I gave up my lunch because I got something a lot better than even cupcakes. So today we're going to talk about the boy in the Bible who shared his lunch and fed 5,000 people and got Jesus and the disciples out of a jam. Isn't that how you guys remember the story? The little boy fed everybody, saved everybody? Well, it's right in the Bible, so I'm going to read it. John 6. Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Hey, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will that go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who has come into the world." So, obviously, everyone then and everyone now knows that it was Jesus that did the feeding, and I was being facetious at the beginning, suggesting that the boy did the feeding. But I do want to put ourselves in the position of the boy this morning. As I go through the different attitudes the boy could have taken, I want you to put yourself in his shoes. I want you to be honest with yourself and think about the type of attitudes, the type of temptations that come to us when we're in situations like this boy was in. What would have tempted us sitting on the lawn with our 5 loaves and our fish? I thought through the different attitudes that he could have had as I studied for this, and I realized that I've been all of them at one point or another. So hopefully thinking about attitudes like this will help me not take the wrong ones in the future when I have these circumstances. Hopefully it'll help you too. So it appears that this boy might have been the only one in the crowd who was prepared for lunch. Everyone else was just sitting there, no lunch, and there he was, sitting pretty. It says he had small loaves and fish, but a can of tuna and some crackers isn't like the worst lunch ever. So this boy was made, like he was set, right? He had what he needed. He had options, and it was like one of those choose your own adventure books where he could have chosen any number of different responses to having loaves and fish, and it would have taken him a different way. He could have been greedy and dumb. He could have felt pretty smug that he had lunch, and he could have kept it to himself. Maybe that would be you. Well, I mean, probably not you, but you probably know someone that's like this. The type of person that says, I'm prepared and you're not. If you wanted lunch, you should have packed one. You should have thought ahead like I did. You should have prepared. It's not my fault that you don't have lunch, and I shouldn't have to share mine just because you didn't think ahead. I think this attitude is all too common, even among Christians. We see it play out in political discussions all the time. If you happen to be in the group that has lunch, it's easy to forget that maybe your mom packed it. In other words, there are lots of circumstances and lots of situations that lead up to you having lunch. But the boy wasn't greedy and dumb. I say greedy and dumb for the first one because he could have been greedy and smart and decided to sell a few loaves and one of the fish at an astronomical markup. It's supply and demand. He could have totally done that. Honestly, that one would probably be me. That would probably be the thing that I would do. Adam's food truck, loaves and fish to the highest bidder. That would have been me. I'm not preying on the misfortunes of others. I'm providing a service. This is something that people need. I'm helping. They're hungry. I have loaves and fish. It's not my fault that's the going rate, right? He could have fed a few people and he could have made a buck in the process, but he didn't. He wasn't greedy and dumb and he wasn't greedy and smart. But greed wouldn't be the only reason the boy might have hung on to his loaves and fish. He could have been scared. Would any of you have just said, oh man, I can't get my lunch out now. I'm embarrassed. Nobody else has lunch. And it's not enough for everybody, so I'll keep it in the pail, and then when everybody leaves, I'll just eat it by myself. I don't want to be the one that's got the loaves and the fish. I don't want to be the one that's eating when nobody else is, and I can't help anybody else with this. His little lunch wouldn't have been much good to a crowd that size, and he could have been afraid of that. And if he would have been afraid of that, when he presented them to the disciples, they would have confirmed his fears when they said, what good is this going to be for a crowd this size? That lunch doesn't amount to anything. Keeping the things that God has given us to ourselves isn't always because we're greedy. Sometimes we're scared. The fear of being inadequate, insignificant, not good enough, statistically zero, will stop us in our tracks. The lunch was all of those things, but the boy wasn't afraid. He could have been generous and shared the lunch with a few people around him. He could have even given all of his lunch away to the people that he thought needed it most. The ones that looked like they hadn't had lunch in a while. The ones who he thought, boy, they're down on their luck. I'm gonna give all my lunch away. I'm gonna be so generous. Wouldn't that be special? The sweet boy who gave all he had to the needy. It would be sweet and it would be touching, but I think we know how it would have played out. A few people would have eaten, but not very much, and the rest of the crowd would still be there and still be hungry. He could have been generous in human terms, but lacked God. He could have done the same act of giving, but without God, it wouldn't have had the same effect. I've been that guy too. I've been in a situation where I felt like I had something and look at all this need. Look at all these people that need help and nobody's doing anything about it. I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to take control. I'm going to take charge. I'm going to do the right thing. Nobody else is. I know a lot of people like that. They are so well-intentioned, so well-meaning, and so generous. They make it their life's mission to solve the problems that they see around them. They work and they give and they pour out their lives for others, but they never yield their life to the one who poured out his life for theirs eternally. Some of the people that I know that they can't do it on their own, but they think if we get a big enough group together, we can really make change. We can really make something happen. Some of the people I know think they can change the world all by themselves. It's crazy to me when I think about it that something as good as compassion and generosity can warp itself into self-importance and arrogance and even pride. That I have something that everybody needs and I can do something about this all by myself. When God isn't in the picture, even our best, even our everything, even our collective everything won't be enough. We can accomplish a lot in human terms. We can help a lot of people in human terms. But everything that we do, everything that we can provide will be temporary. It won't be the type of food that feeds souls and matters in eternity. The boy could have given it all he had on his own and failed to satisfy the hunger of the crowd, but he didn't. Instead, the boy decided against greed, he decided against fear, and he decided against human generosity. And he gave his lunch to someone who could actually do something with it. When he did, his lunch was multiplied, and he ate all that he could stomach, along with 5,000 other people. I don't know what that boy thought Jesus was going to do with his lunch. Maybe he didn't think about it. Maybe he saw the hunger around him, decided not to be greedy, knew he didn't have enough, but wanted to give all he had anyway. Maybe he had faith that however it turned out, he'd be glad that he gave all he had to one that he thought could do something about it. Here's the scary part, though. When that boy handed over his lunch, he didn't have lunch anymore. When it left his hands were empty, and so was his belly. From the passage we read, it doesn't seem like it took Jesus too long to start breaking it and multiplying it. And it also was evident from the scripture that Jesus knew ahead of time what he was going to do, but the boy didn't know that. The boy just had lunch and gave it up to see what would happen. He emptied his lunch pail and he had faith. The heading of this passage in my Bible says, Jesus feeds the 5,000. The story mentions the boy, but the message is clear that Jesus did the feeding. We can't see from the story what the boy told his buddies and his parents when he got home, but based on the rest of the story and the decisions that he made, I like to think it went something like, hey, Mom, you're never going to believe this. I was there and Jesus was preaching and there was 5,000 other people and there was no food. I was the only one that had lunch and I gave him my lunch and he just kept breaking it up and there was food everywhere. We all ate more than we could stomach and they had 12 baskets of leftover. Can you believe that? I bet that's something like his story went when he told it. And if that was the way that he told his story, his act of generosity and faith didn't stop multiplying when the food was in the baskets and everybody was full. The fact that we're still talking about it today, the fact that he told people and they told people and it's been recorded and now I'm telling you all this morning, shows that when we give everything we've got to God and he actually does something good with it, it continues to multiply and it continues to touch people well after the act is done. Here we are, focused a whole morning on what one little boy who gave all he had, even though it wasn't enough, even though it was statistically zero in a crowd of 5,000, his act of saying, this is all I've got, God, maybe you can do something with it. Here we are still talking about it. He didn't do enough, but he did the right thing. It was his response, his act of generosity and faith that continued multiplying. Jesus later said in this chapter, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Jesus wasn't talking there about food that spoils. He said as much. Why are you chasing after food that spoils? Jesus said, disciples, the reason you're all following me here, people, the reason you're following me isn't because of the sign, it's because you ate what I gave you. Stop chasing after food that spoils. Stop working for things that spoil. Start working for things that are eternal. And then says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. It's not our job as Christians to keep what we have for ourselves. We are not called to profit off the misfortunes and the lack of that others have. We should not be afraid of our inadequacies. We should not be afraid that we only have enough lunch for one. Nor should we believe that we alone can make a difference that actually matters. Our call from this story is simple, but simple doesn't mean easy. When you give all you have, little as it may be, you are left empty-handed. That is not easy. It's very simple, but it's hard to do. But that's our call. Give all we've got to the one who can make something out of it and have faith that he will. Let's pray.